G'day guys, and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson, we're looking at key knowledge point 326. That is Unit 3, Area of Study 2, and the sixth key knowledge point for this area of study. Today specifically, we're looking at performance management strategies to achieve both personal and business objectives. Helpfully, this key knowledge point gives us a list of different performance management strategies that you need to be able to talk about. But once again, this key knowledge point uses the word including before that list. So this list is not complete. It's not finite. You are able to, in an assessment task, talk about any performance management strategies that you are aware of, that you think you can justify in the response to a question, and your teachers have to be prepared to accept that. When we're talking about performance management, typically we're talking about processes that can be used to evaluate the performance of an individual employee. When evaluating the performance of an individual employee, typically that's done by comparing their progress against individual objectives that have been set for that employee and their contributions in the progress towards overall business objectives. Once objectives have been set for either the business or the employee, performance should be continually evaluated, or at least regularly evaluated, to ensure that both employees individually and as a whole are working effectively towards the achievement of objectives. The management strategies that we'll be talking about in this lesson are right there on your screen. Let's get started. Management by objectives is the first of our strategies. If I could get my head out of the way there, you can see that there's this nice circular diagram that we use to demonstrate largely the steps involved in management by objectives. Management by objectives starts when a manager and an employee work together to set individual goals for that employee. Now, these could be anything from turning up to work on time, to completing a project by a certain date, or even just completing a project. Whatever it is, if the manager and the employee agree that it's something that would be good for the employee to work towards, then it's a good objective to set. And when it comes to management by objectives, the employee's evaluation and their performance management process will come down to evaluating the employee's progress towards achieving that objective. Their performance will be evaluated after some time has passed, and feedback will be provided to the employee based on their progress towards that objective. If they're not quite meeting that objective, or if not enough progress has been made, some corrective action can be taken by the manager, perhaps implementation of training to improve that employee's skills, knowledge, and experience, or perhaps implementation in training, investment in training as a strategy to increase the employee's motivation to help them work towards that goal. Whatever the case may be, corrective action can be taken. But if the employee has achieved their goal, typically this is where the manager would take a moment to recognize that performance, perhaps even reward the employee, perhaps dole out some performance-related pay or something like that, and recognize the employee has achieved their goal before they sit down together again and establish a new goal and repeat this process. Through this cycle of goal setting, monitoring performance, delivery of feedback, and then taking corrective action, or recognizing the employee's achievement before setting a new goal, we have a system by which clear success criteria for each individual employee is being established. The manager is able to, through this process, monitor staff performance closely and effectively, provide feedback to each individual employee based on their individual goals, and then implement corrective action when and where necessary. Another performance management strategy you might implement in your business is performance appraisal, which is a less robust, less defined system than management by objectives, but it's one where a manager and an employee will meet periodically to discuss employees' performance, usually focused on measurable metrics, so how much work they've achieved relative to how much work they should achieve, how much they've been determined to contribute to projects or contribute in meetings, their timely arrival at work. Quantifiable metrics are often involved in evaluations, and certainly this sort of evaluation period might be a time where managers can not just provide feedback to employees on their performance, but determine if the employee is in line for a pay rise or for a career advancement opportunity, some sort of promotion. Perhaps an evaluation process can be an opportunity for someone in a management position to be identified as not really fulfilling the duties of their role and be slated for some sort of demotion. And certainly a training needs analysis is often part of a performance appraisal process where employees who have skills, knowledge, or experience that is found to be lacking can be slated for the implementation of some kind of training. Generally speaking, from someone who's gone through them myself, evaluations can be quite intimidating for employees, particularly if the employee isn't necessarily aware of what's going to be brought up in the evaluation ahead of time. And in many scenarios that you might work through with your teachers, evaluations have been applied poorly in the past. But when done intentionally and well by a well-resourced and well-educated manager, evaluations can be particularly beneficial. Having the opportunity for a manager to provide regular feedback to employees on their performance is one of the characteristics of a most motivating goal in goal-setting theory, in Locke and Latham's goal-setting theory. And so we know that the provision of regular feedback is motivating for employees. And when an evaluation process is done right, when it's done well, and it can be used to help support employees and to build them up rather than to cut them down, it can be part of a motivating, one of the tools that an manager will use to build a motivating culture of feedback and training and development. Self-evaluation is where you get an employee to assess themselves. They'll perhaps be reminded of the goals that were set for them, and they'll be asked to evaluate their own performance. Typically then, that self-evaluation is used as the springboard or the launching ground for a conversation with management, where management might take that opportunity to agree or disagree about certain aspects of the employee's self-performance. But it's a really useful tool for managers who want to hear from the employees themselves what training needs the employees feel like they can identify in their own performance. Certainly, if you as the manager are in an environment where your employees are more skilled or more knowledgeable in a context than you are, the sorts of scenarios where we previously spoke about being appropriate to apply laissez-faire management. If you're the management of a team of research scientists and you're managing their programs and helping them write grants, but they're the ones doing the research and they know far better the sort of science they're doing, perhaps having them evaluate their own performance is totally appropriate because they have a far better idea of the ins and outs of their technical specifications and technical ability than you would have a concept. But in other cases, it might be that employees overestimate their abilities. Certainly, if the relationship with the manager is not a particularly trusting one, and evaluations can be seen as a scary process, then employees might feel it's important to overemphasize their positive contributions to the business and try and push their weaknesses under the rug and draw as little attention to them as possible. So it is important for any manager who's going to rely on the process for self-evaluation that they're relying on ongoing documentation and ongoing observation and ongoing opportunities for self-evaluation so that patterns can be identified. If an employee is exaggerating their abilities and their potential, then perhaps that's one area that needs to be looked at for training. And certainly employee observation is one method you can use for performance management. It's where instead of asking the employee to evaluate themselves or sitting down and doing a post-performance evaluation where you're looking at quantifiable metrics, it's one where an employee is appraised through observation by watching them do their job. If this is to be done, observations should occur regularly and should be done impartially and with no particular agenda in mind, unless that's communicated perfectly clearly to the employee. They have to be given every opportunity to be as natural and perform as well as they could in any other circumstance without the anxiety of suddenly having their boss stand behind them while they work. And so certainly in many cases, the 360-degree feedback method or observation method is quite popular, where you wouldn't just be relying on the observations of the superior manager, but you might be also having some of their colleagues document what they've observed about that employee. If this employee interacts with customers, you might have some customers or some secret shoppers observe the employee and record their observations. You might have their direct manager record some observations, and people who work in similar fields who interact with that employee. And you'll get all of these observations and collate them all and form a more holistic image or a holistic model report of how this employee performs in the business as a result of collating all of that information. In summary, it's important if you're a business manager to evaluate the performance of your employees. When it comes to performance management, the 4 strategies we've just talked about are really useful for working alongside your employees to identify their strengths and weaknesses, to identify any areas that you might identify as needing training, to work with those employees to set goals for future performance, and to give them feedback on their performance all the while. What this key knowledge point doesn't necessarily address when we're talking through those processes is that performance management is about ensuring that your employees are able to work to the standards expected of them. If they can't, the terminology you want to rely on is taking corrective action. In some cases, if an employee isn't working up to standard, training can be implemented to help build their skills, knowledge, and experience to help bring them up to standard. In other cases, if the standard is so far away from the employee's performance that it's irreconcilable, termination of that employee's employment contract might be necessary. That might be the corrective action you need to take. As we go through the rest of this area of study, some of those other corrective actions will be the focus. But for now, as long as you are conscious that taking corrective action is the process that we want to implement or how we want to describe implementing fixes when employee performance isn't up to standard, then you're going to be just fine. As far as this key knowledge point is concerned, evaluation should be done regularly, and employees should know how they're going to be evaluated. Clarity when it comes to goal setting, in goal setting theory, is one of the motivating characteristics. Certainly, the provision of regular and relevant feedback is another motivating characteristic, and ensuring that employees feel like they're being judged fairly and have the opportunity to succeed contributes a great deal to their sense of self-esteem, which Maslow identifies as being motivating. So there's a great deal of value in motivating fairly and regularly, least of all because a culture of development and fair evaluation will help engage and motivate employees. We know that engaged and motivated employees are more productive and efficient, and that's part and parcel of why we need to do regular performance management of our employees. That's all for today. See you next time.